So in the 11th verse, the Upanishad concludes that one should practice both vidya and avidya. One should understand vidya and avidya together. And then he attains immortality. Through vidya means knowledge. Through knowledge he conquers death. Death in the form of ignorance. That's the conclusion in the 12th verse. Sorry, in the 11th verse. Now we are coming to the 12th verse. That's what we have to deal with today. Here you find two terms are used. Asambhuti and Sambhuti. The mantra I shall read and then I shall explain. These are two very important terms in understanding the implications of this Upanishad. Antham tama pravishanti ye asambhutim upasate tato bhuya iva te tamo ya usambhutyam rataha. This is the mantra. Ye asambhutim upasate. Those who worship the unmanifested, or sometimes called non-becoming. I will explain this. It's a technical term. So those who worship the unmanifested, they attain blindness. And those who are engrossed in Sambhuti, they enter a world which is much darker. This is the idea behind. Now there is a great philosophical evolution behind this. Asambhuti here means Maya, Prakriti, or sometimes it is called avidya. Sambhuti means vidya. And again, Asambhuti also means the origin of the entire creation, from where this entire creation emerges. What is creation? Creation is nothing but a combination of name and form. That's what we call creation. We can never think of an object in this world except as a blend of, as a synthesis of a particular name and a particular form. Even if we think of something which you have seen, which perhaps you may argue it doesn't have a form at all, but still in our mind we will have an idea of having seen something, the name of which I don't know. So you can never think of anything in this world, anything in the empirical world, in the phenomenal world, without associating a form and a corresponding name, a word which you use to recall that object. As I said, you may see something for the first time in your life, the name of which you don't know. And later you may recollect the form. When you recollect the form, you mentally imagine something which has a form, but name of which you do not know. But still you have an idea of a name. Only you do not know the word by which that particular object is called. So what is this phenomenal world? It is nothing but a combination of name and form. Now, Sambhuti in the Upanishadic terminology also means an idea of a God with a definite form, with a name and certain specific characteristics: compassionate, mercy, strength, power, glory, and so on. This is associated with the Vedic evolution of the idea of God. Going deeper, you will understand when you read Upanishads later, even if you read the works of Max Muller, Doisen and others, they have incorporated in their writings these ideas which they have taken from the Upanishadic and Vedic terminology. Modern Indologists like Doisen and Max Muller and a few others, Parpola is an Italian Vedic scholar who still perhaps may not have passed away. So they have accepted that there are 6 stages in the evolution of the idea of God in Vedic literature. A traditional Vedic scholar won't analyze the evolution of God in this way. But modern thinkers and interpreters, in their attempt to make Vedic philosophy intelligible to those who are well-versed in European thought systems, have analyzed 6 stages in the evolution of the idea of God in the Vedas. The first stage is, it's called Pantheism. The term was given by Max Muller. Pantheism means the belief that nature is God. The divinity expresses itself in its complete form in nature. In Vedas there are many hymns which are Sanskrit called suktas, Sindhu Sukta, Saraswati Sukta, and so many suktas, where different natural phenomena are elevated to the status of deities. So you can find from the lowest pantheistic idea to absolutistic monism or absolutic idealism. These are the 2 stages. The first, the primitive stage, the beginning, or rather the kindergarten, or the most elementary stage in the evolution of the idea of God is pantheism. It's a kind of nature worship. Even in modern times, great poets like Wordsworth and few, they were all pantheists. They commented this attitude. And the highest idea is Advaita. It's called absolutist monism. Between these 2 stages, there are 4 intermediary stages. So after pantheism, the next stage is called polytheism. Polytheism implies belief or denotes belief in a variety of deities or gods. So in the Rigveda Samhita, which is the oldest of Vedic literature, and it is the oldest religious, philosophical scripture also, because modern philologists and Orientalists have come to the conclusion that it is much older than the city of the dead of the ancient Egyptians, which may have taken the present form around 2000 BC. Rigveda is at least it's 6,000 years old, it means 4000 BC. So the second stage in the evolution is polytheism, belief in a variety of gods and goddesses. The Vedic seers began, first of all, equating nature with God, which is called pantheism, and then they began to contemplate, is there any divine principle, a supernatural principle which functions, which activates, which energizes this natural phenomena? So Saraswati Suktam is there. In one way you can interpret it to mean the river Saraswati. In another way you can interpret it in the sense that it implies the goddess of learning, the supreme idea of learning or knowledge. The third stage in the evolution of Vedic pantheon is called Henotheism. This is Max Muller's. Max Muller has made a great contribution by proposing these ideas. He worked very hard. So Max Muller says the third stage is Henotheism. Now what he means by Henotheism is this. In Vedas there are innumerable deities and innumerable hymns, devotional songs, in praise of different gods and goddesses. In many of these hymns, the particular deity or godhead, which is a theme of that hymn, is elevated to the supreme deity. So sometimes it's called opportunistic monotheism, a term which is it doesn't have any sarcasm behind it. It is the way Henotheism is sometimes explained or described. Because there is Indra Suktam is there. In Indra Suktam, if Indra is elevated to the status of the supreme deity. These are different deities. Vishnu, Indra, Rudra, Pavamana, Soma, and so on. These are different deities. Agni, Varuna, Vayu, Matarishwa, and so on you find. So pantheism, polytheism, henotheism. The fourth stage in this evolution is monotheism, which you can find in the religious scriptures of Abrahamic religions, in the Bible, in the Quran, and also in the Judaic religious scriptures like Talmud or Torah and Old Testament, all you find. The idea of a supreme God who is the creator of the world is identified with the creatorship. He is the deity, he is the power which has got many characteristics but no form. God has no form but many characteristics and many names also. It's called a monotheistic God, a supreme God who creates this world, who maintains, sustains this world, and who supervises the functions and activities of different living beings inhabiting his creation. And then the fifth stage is called monism. By monism, we should understand Adi Shankaracharya's Advaita, which doesn't deny the previous four stages, but accommodates all these stages. Advaita doesn't reject any of the earlier stages in the evolution of the concept of God, but rather it accommodates all this, but goes beyond that. That God is conceived to be an absolute principle, which is beyond name and form. Remember, Advaita doesn't say that God has no form, no name. What it says is God is beyond name and beyond form. This is a very important point to understand. Many people, even a great thinker like Aurobindo, as even in his interpretation of Ishavasya, which is well known, he has ridiculed Advaita. He says that Shankara's Brahman is inactive like a stone. Such statements you find in Aurobindo's interpretation of Ishavasya, which is a liberated interpretation, though not highly rated by Indian scholars, traditional scholars. So, Advaitic Brahman, which is implied by monastic monism, is not a concept of God which is devoid of name and forms, which is devoid of characteristics or attributes, but rather it transcends all this. Because any name, any form, any attribute, any characteristic amounts to a definition. If you give something, anything a name and form, you are defining it. And every definition is a limitation. A definition means you are confining something within the four walls of your definition. So it means limitation. So Advaitic God is Atman, as an indweller in every living being in this world, And it is Brahman as the ultimate transcendental principle, with a supreme principle which assumes the form of different gods and goddesses, different names and all that. So a God with form, a monotheistic God with attributes and characteristics, who creates his world, is accepted in Advaita. But Advaita says there is a higher idea of God, where the creation and creator merge into one. Now, the last stage, which is not a term used by Max Muller, Deutsch and others, which is called absolutistic monism. It is the highest interpretation of Advaita experience, Advaitic experience, where the philosopher doesn't analyze different stages of man's spiritual experience, but just speaks from the standpoint of highest experience. If you read Mandukya Karika, Mandukya Upanishad, you find Ajadavadam, the idea that there is no creation at all. I won't go into those details till I take up that subject. Now here, Antam Tama Pravishanti, Ye Asambhutim Upasate, Tato Bhuya Ivate Tamo, Yau Sambhutyam Rataha. The idea is simple. Those who understand or those who worship Asambhuti, which means the unmanifested form, they enter, they become one with, they experience the unity with the unmanifest form. But that is not the end of the journey, spiritual journey. They have to be born again in the next cycle. That's what the Upanishad states, the commentator states. And those who follow or those who understand and worship Sambhuti, by which means Vidya or Hiranyagarbha, which is a monotheistic God, they attain the characteristics and qualities of that particular God. But they can never get liberation from the cycle of life and death. That's what the Upanishad say. But the Upanishad will tell you later, in the 16th, 17th verse you find here, a sincere practitioner, a sincere aspirant, who worships a monotheistic God, a God with attributes, will automatically evolve to the next stage. Because that absolute, that monotheistic God himself will take him to the next stage. God with form will take you to the transcendental stage, where God is beyond name and form. You find in Siddharamakrishna's life, Siddharamakrishna practiced all these different stages of spiritual life. And a great philosopher, a great ascetic, a great saint came to the Dakshineswar temple where Siddharamakrishna was living and trained him in Advaita experience. Advaita sadhana is called Advaitic way of meditation, Advaitic way of contemplation and so on. But Sri Ramakrishna was fully established in the idea of God as the universal mother. Mother who creates his world, sustains the world, who is compassionate. That was the idea of God which Sri Ramakrishna had experienced till then. But Sri Ramakrishna knew that there is higher level. And in Sri Ramakrishna's life, we find the whole life of Sri Ramakrishna is like a divine play. One scene after another scene, it comes and goes one after another. So different types of sadhanas were practiced by him. So at one stage, a great ascetic, his name is Totapuri. Totapuri, the Puri is, Puri is one of the 10 schools of sannyasis founded by Adi Shankaracharya. So Totapuri came to the Dakshineshwar, and Totapuri found Sri Ramakrishna is a fit aspirant to practice Advaita or non-dualistic way of contemplation and meditation and spiritual practice. So he asked him, are you interested in practicing Advaita? Sri Ramakrishna, Sri Ramakrishna was fully immersed in the thought of the meditation of the Divine Mother. So I must ask my mother. So Sri Ramakrishna went to the temple, and in his divine, ecstatic, mystical way he communicated with mother, and mother gave him permission. Mother told him, it is for this purpose that I have brought him here. He has come here to teach you, to train you in Advaita. So Sri Ramakrishna intervened in the practice of Advaitic contemplation, Advaitic meditation. And at one stage, Sri Ramakrishna could not transcend the idea of God with name and form. He was a worshipper of Kali, the Divine Mother. So all the time the form of Divine Mother stood in the way of his going beyond, his transcending the name and form. And then Totapuri took a piece of crystal and pressed here and asked him to meditate on this point. And Sri Ramakrishna had a mystical experience of what is called in traditional Sanskrit called Jiva Brahma Aikyam. That means the highest Advaitic, non-dualistic, mystical experience. So, if one is sincerely devoted to the worship of the God with form, that God himself will open the way for him to go beyond that. I'm not jumping from one verse to another. If just take the 16th verse, 15th verse. Please take 15th verse. Here you can find Hiranmayena patrena satyasyapi hidam mukham tattvam pushan apavrunu satyadharmaya drishtaye. This is the mantra. This 15th mantra gives us a glimpse into the mind of a true seeker of God who has practiced sincerity and faith and devotion to God. And what happens to him? What will be his thoughts when he is facing death? Or rather, when death is staring at him in his face. What are his thoughts? These ideas are expressed in this 15th verse. The verse is very important. It tells us that the face of the ultimate reality is covered with a golden disc, golden lids. That is the shining golden orb, the face of sun. The sun is covered with the golden lids. You kindly remove that lids so that I can see your true nature. The implication is this. It is very, very important and very much related to what I have been explaining till now. A devotee who has practiced truth and sincerity, all the moral qualities, moral values, and who has led an ideal life. But he has not attained highest spiritual realization of non-dualistic experience. And he has been worshipping sun as his God. Now sun is one of the symbols, Vedic symbols. In Vedic symbology is so vast and varied, Sun, Surya, Pushan. Sun is also one of the deities mentioned in the Vedic symbolism. Now, there is a special reason why Vedic seers used to conceive of the ultimate idea of a monotheistic God as sun. Because sun is responsible for human life in this way. Without sunlight, there can be no life. There can be no grains without rains. And there can be no rains without sun. The concept of the idea of time also depends upon the sun. The day, the night, the hour, the minutes, the year, and the different seasons. All these ideas are explained in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. So sun is the regulating principle, the regulator of these cosmic phenomena. From a pantheistic point of view, sun is the highest idea of God, because in pantheism, nature itself is equated with the supreme God. And sun is perhaps the highest and most universal symbol of the divine truth in pantheism. As I said earlier, without sun there can be no life in this world. No animal life, no animal kingdom, no human beings. Without sun there will be no rivers, no oceans. Without water, without rains there will be no water principle. And rain comes only because sun absorbs water from the ocean and then comes down in the form of rains also. So sun was a very important figure in Vedic symbology. So the 15th verse tells us, it gives us a peep into the mind of a great devotee of God who had been worshipping sun as the supreme God. Then he requests him, see, your true nature is covered with a golden lid. What is that golden lid? Name and form. Name and form. You remove the name and form, then you get that supreme reality. In fact, if you remove name and form from the universe, there will be only one truth. In the Chandogya Upanishad, there is an interesting episode which drives home this idea in a very emphatic style. There is a dialogue in the 6th chapter of Chandogya Upanishad, a dialogue between a father and his son. Father's name is Uddalaka, son's name is Shvetaketu. I explained this some time back, but I shall refer to one idea. In the early lectures, I referred to this. The son went to his school, and after his studies, he returned, and the father found the boy. By the time he was not a boy, he was quite grown-up young man. Instead of becoming humble and tranquil, with an equanimity of mind, the boy had become a headstrong fellow who thought himself to be a very learned man. The father wanted to bring him to a proper understanding of what education really ought to be. So the father asked, did you learn that by knowing which everything that is unknown becomes known? Did you hear about that by hearing which everything that is unheard of becomes known? In this way, the father put a number of questions. The son said, well, I don't know anything about any such learning. Then father told him, that's the real learning. Then he says, Vacharambhanam vikaro namadheyam murtigatyeva satyam. That is the relevant portion here in this context. The Upanishad mantra says, all that is changing, everything in the peripheral, in the empirical, in the phenomenal world, which is subject to change, which comes into existence sometime in the past, exists for some time, and will vanish sometime in future. All these are changing. These are only names and forms. Nothing other than that. You remove name and form, then it is the same. The example is given, Mrittiketeva Satyam. See, on the one side, you have a heap of clay. On the other side, you have a number of utensils. made from that clay. Glasses, pots and pans and so on, made of the same clay. Now, what is the distinction between this heap of clay on the one hand and 100 utensils, different shapes and sizes, different types of pots, pans, buckets, glasses, all made of clay? The only difference is these utensils have got a name and a shape. When the clay takes the shape of a glass, you call it glass, because it has got a shape, a form. So you remove this name and form, then it is not different from the clay. So anything which changes, the clay becomes glass or pots and pans, etc. All these are nothing but name and form. So the 15th mantra, which I am not taking right now, but it is related to the idea which I have been discussing earlier. That's why I am referring to the 15th mantra. Hiranmayena patrena satyasyapihitam mukham. So your face is covered with a golden lids of name and form. And then the devotee makes a request to the sun god. He says, Tat satyadharmaya drishtaye tuam apavrunu. That light you kindly remove for my sake, so that I can have a clear vision of your true nature. So, a sincere devotee of a monotheistic God, a God with name and form, a supreme deity, will automatically evolve to the next stage of his spiritual evolution, to the stage of Advaita or non-dualism. So here, that's the idea which I wanted to stress. Now here, Sambhudi stands for a monotheistic God. And what is the result of worshipping a monotheistic God? The result is we get all the characteristics and qualities of that God. See, if you worship a God who you claim is compassionate, you cannot yourself be very cruel and merciless. Then you are doing a great disservice to the very idea of God. When you worship a God who is merciful and compassionate, you should also have a little of that mercy and compassion. Otherwise, you cannot be a true worshipper of that God. So, the worshipper of a monotheistic God gets all his characteristics, all his qualities, like compassion, mercy, etc. From a humanistic point of view, this is the highest understanding of the divine principle. From a humanistic point of view. From a metaphysical point of view, there is a higher idea of God. Remember, the humanistic need not necessarily be metaphysical. Okay, metaphysics goes beyond humanistic ideas. That's why I said, from a purely humanistic point of view, we are contented with a God who is merciful, who is compassionate, who creates His world, who looks after all of us, and who has an eye in our welfare. But for a philosopher, for a true seeker of supreme truth, this should not be the end of the journey. There is a higher principle, which I said earlier, which is called Atman in Advaita. Remember, Atman is not a name of supreme reality. That should be understood. In the supreme, there is a little bit of a intricate philosophical intricacy behind this. If I say that God cannot have a definition, then and Brahman is a God, is a transcendental concept of God, it doesn't have a definition. Brahman amounts, the name Brahman itself amounts to a definition. So that's why it is stated in the Upanishad literature, in Shankaracharya's commentary, it is said, Atman and Brahman are not the names of the supreme principle Advaita. Atman and Brahman are the terms used to attempt to explain what really cannot be explained. And there is a philosophical reason why these two terms are used. You find Vedic symbolism, Omkara, the same. Somebody said, Omkara, your God, Brahman is Omkara. Brahman is not Omkara. And Brahman is not Brahman either. Atman is not Atman. Atman, Brahman, Omkara, Pranava. All these are terms used in Vedic or Upanishadic symbology to explain, to define what can never be explained or defined. So Shankaracharya makes the point very clear. Atman is not a name of God. The special reason, there are certain definitions, descriptions why that word Atman or Brahman are used. Great thinkers like Appaya Dikshita, Sureshwara, all these are commentators and super commentators. I won't quote them because it may not be proper in this context, but I shall put the idea behind. Atman implies the supreme reality which is present as the indweller in every living being. When somebody dies, something leaves him, even if he is physically healthy, strong and sound. That invisible principle which leaves that body, which turns that body into corpse, that is Atman. With that word is used. So the word Atman is explained in 3-4 slokas by great thinkers like Appaya Dikshita, who has written a number of books in Sanskrit language, who lived hundreds of years back, around 13th, 14th century. Again the word Brahman. Brahman is also a word, it means cosmic, samashti. That which includes everything, that which is the indweller, that is immanent and also transcendent. So, this should be understood very clearly. In Vedic symbology, in Upanishadic terminology, these two terms are used, but they are certainly not names of the absolute reality, because absolute reality can never have a name. So that should be understood. Now, here, the Upanishad says, look at the third and fourth part of this lines of this mantra. Then I shall come to the first and second. Tato bhuya ivate tamo yau sambhutyam vrataha. Sambhutyam vrataha means those who are the worshippers of a monotheistic God with a name and form. They get the characteristics, they inherit the characteristics of that supreme monotheistic God. But the supreme truth is beyond that. Because wherever you explain or define a reality with certain names and forms and attributes, it is a definition. The supreme truth, which is beyond all days, is not in conflict with the monotheistic or pantheistic or henotheistic or other ideas of God. The point is, the absolute idealism or monism goes beyond all this. It's not in conflict with the earlier stages in the evolution. It goes beyond them. That's the idea behind it. So, those who are worshippers of an idea of God with a definite form and who think that there is nothing beyond this, they also remain in a state of ignorance of the supreme reality. That's the idea behind. And also, those who conceive of the supreme God as the origin or the unmanifested, some absolute principle from which the entire cosmic phenomena come into existence. That's the idea. Many people, I mentioned this earlier, many people will tell you that there is a supreme truth somewhere from which everything has come, from which everything has emerged. But I don't believe in a God or anything. I won't go to a place of worship. But I do believe in something which is the origin of the universe, which is invisible. That is what is meant by asambhuti, which in Sanskrit is called avyakrita or unmanifest, etc. I won't use those terms. So both of them are ignorant of the supreme truth. That's why they are living in a state of ignorance. The ignorance is implied by the word tama here. Tama means darkness. The word darkness implies ignorance. And the word light implies knowledge. So those who think that they have reached the highest idea, highest experience of God by worshipping a God who creates His world, they are right, but they have not yet reached the highest stage in the evolution of spiritual experience, because the truth is beyond that. Again, here one point should be understood. 2 points I want to stress again and again, because these are very, very important. There is a lot of misunderstanding. Advaita is not in conflict with any other ideas of God. Advaita tells us, non-dualistic philosophy tells us, that the supreme truth is beyond any attributes, beyond name and form, beyond any definition, description or explanation, and so on. But it is not in conflict with other ideas of God. Shankaracharya, I will quote because this is very important, so I shall quote. There is a famous verse in Mandukya Karika, which is a commentary on Mandukya Upanishad in metrical form. The author is Gaudapada, who lived maybe 200 years before Shankaracharya. There he says, Swasiddhanta vyavasthasu dvaitino nischida dridham parasparam viruddhyante tairayam na viruddhyate. This is the important verse in the Mandukya Karika, Gaudapada Acharya. The idea is this, very simple. Gaudapada says, people fight among themselves, arguing, saying that my God is a true God, your God is wrong. That we find, if you look at the history of the world, they're having more warfare, more battles, more bloodsheds in the name of religion and God than in the name of any agnostic or atheistic philosophical systems. So this is what we find. So Shankaracharya says, people fight among themselves, arguing that their own individual ideas of God alone are real or true, everything else is untrue or unreal. But Advaita doesn't fight with any of them. Asmadiyoyam Vaidyigo Dharma Parasparam Virodhi Na Viruddhyate. Means this Advaita doesn't quarrel, fight with any of them. Then he says, Shankaracharya says, Yatha Suhasta Padadibhi. I shall explain in English. But Shankaracharya says, see, we cannot fight with our own hands and legs. If you are angry with your own head and give a knock to your head, you are going to suffer. You won't fight with your own hands and legs or your heads unless you are a fit candidate for the asylum. So, nobody quarrels with himself. Similarly, Advaita looks upon all other systems of religious philosophy, all other faith systems as their own. So, Advaita cannot fight with any of these religious philosophies because they are all we accommodate all of them. We are one with all of them. We are not in conflict with any of them. That's one important principle to be remembered. Second point is, in the Upanishad literature, when we explain the Advaita philosophy, we use terms like Atman, Brahman, in English, soul, consciousness, etc. We should always remember, these are the terms used to explain or to call something which cannot be called by a name. All these ideas are made clear in the commentaries on Upanishads and Bhagavad Gita by the great Advaita philosopher Adi Shankaracharya. So here, what the verse says is this. Those who think that the unmanifest form from which everything has come is the Supreme God, they attain a world of darkness, means they remain in a state of darkness about the ultimate truth. Again, those who believe that a God with a definite form and name and so on is the supreme principle, they also remain in a state of darkness. The ultimate principle, which is indescribable, transcends all these concepts and goes beyond all this. Again, this 13th verse. Anyadeva ahu sambhavat anyad ahu asambhavat idi susrumadhiranam yenastat vichachakshiri. Sambhavat anyadeva ahu. The idea is this: the result of worshipping a God with a definite name and form is one thing. Asambhavat anyat ahu. And the result of worshipping God as the unmanifest, as the origin of the universe, as that from which all these names and forms have emerged, that is still different. So both these results are different, distinct, not the same. That is what this verse says. It leads to some other grander ideas in the coming pages. Iti susrumadhiranam yenastat vichachakshiri. This is what we have learned from the great sages of the past. This is what this verse implies. 14th and 15th verse we will deal with. Sambhudim cha vinasham cha yastad veda ubhayam saha vinashena mrityum tirtva sambhutyam amrutamasnuti. To give in prose order, you find those who are reading Shankara's commentary, you find Shankara says the first Sambhudim should be read as Asambhudim. I won't go to those details because this is not that kind of a class, but we will deal with later. So Sambhudim cha vinasham cha yastad veda ubhayam saha. Sambhudim cha vinasham cha ubhayam yaha saha veda saha vinashena mrityum tirtva asambhutya amrutam ashnuti. Here there is a synthesis, there is a blending of two modes of worship of the ultimate reality. Both are incomplete ways of approaching the supreme truth. These slokas, these verses are expressed here. They are given here to lead the student gradually to the highest understanding of the supreme principle. So, this verse says, those who worship the unmanifest, that's why the Sambhudim should be understood as unmanifest. And those who worship the monotheistic God, the creator God, together they attain immortality. Here immortality doesn't mean understanding of the supreme principle. They are not born again. That's the implication here. Those who worship a monotheistic God, a God with name and form, well, they are able to live in this world. They are able to go beyond the worries and problems and limitations of life in this world. They are able to solve their empirical worldly problems. That's what people generally do. When we go to a God whom we understand as the creator of the universe, what we do? We pray. We pray to Him to solve our problems. And we pray to Him to reward us with certain attributes, certain items which will make our life happier. That's what generally do. In the Vedic literature, you find a gradual evolution. There are some Vedic hymns where the ancient sages are praying for long life, children, money, status, and some of them even pray for going to heaven. And then there are some Vedic hymns, those who learn this Medha Suktam, we find my Medha, my Praja, my Agnistejo, Dadhadu, those who chant here sometimes on New Temple. This is an example. Many such examples are there. Give us long life, give us children, make us live for 100 years. Pasyema Saradasadam, Jivema Saradasadam. These are some of the Vedic hymns. You see, they are praying to God. The beginning of one spiritual evolution. We conceive of a God who listens to our prayers and who solves our problems. Upanishads do not condemn them. Upanishads consider they are also sincere devotees of God. In the Gita you find Udara Sarvaivaite, you find here. They are also noble-minded people. Those who go to a place of worship, any place of worship, and pray for solving their problems, pray for wealth and money. It is true. In fact, Vedanta tells us, Vedanta gives a very interesting description of the intermediary period between the two stages of a man's spiritual evolution. Which are the two stages? First stage, you think of a God who listens to our prayers, who is compassionate, who will give us wealth if we are poor, who give us status if we don't have a status, who give us long life and health if we don't have both of them. They are also true, sincere seekers of God. In Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna implies, and the commentators explain, how this man becomes a higher devotee of a higher order. If you pray sincerely to God for solving your worldly problems and for giving you some worldly pleasures, God listens to you and your prayers are answered. Now, when you go on repeating this again, you feel a sense of gratitude to this compassionate God who listens to your prayers and who solves your problems. This sense of gratitude establishes an intimate relationship between devotee and God. God has listened to me, He has solved my problems. So I must love that God. I must worship Him even without praying for anything. At a higher level. So, then slowly a devotee starts worshipping God without any desire, without any selfish motive. That's how he evolves the next stage of spiritual evolution. This is what the Gita says. This idea of Gita is nothing but a commentary on the Upanishad, the philosophy, nothing else. So, this verse tells you that if you combined the worship of the unmanifest and the worship of the manifest monotheistic God, Hiranyagarbha sometimes called, together, you go beyond the problems of this world. But the Upanishad doesn't tell you that it takes you to the highest spiritual realization. The highest spiritual realization in Advaitic tradition is cessation of this wheel of, or the cycle of life and death. If you combine these two types of worship, you are able to live for a long time in a higher world, in the celestial world. But after a long time, you have to be born again. You will be born again. But if you want to go beyond this cycle of life and death, so even to be born as a king with all pleasures is a matter of grief in Vedantic tradition. Birth itself, by its very nature, is a limitation. It's an imperfection in Vedantic terminology. Even going to heaven is an imperfection, is a limitation. Vedanta is perhaps the only religious philosophy which looks even beyond heaven. Because Vedanta tells us that even if you go to heaven and live there for millions of years, enjoying the fruits, the results of your good actions for which God has given you this reward, still, when these results are exhausted, you will be born again. One can go beyond this cycle of life and death only when he realizes that he is the supreme principle, supreme truth, Atman or Brahman, supreme consciousness, which is never born and therefore which never dies. It is Ajam and it is Anantam. It is the eternal supreme principle. When one realizes that truth, he gets out of this cycle of death. That's why, we are after all what we conceive ourselves to be what we are. That's a spiritual principle and also a philosophical principle. We are actually what we sincerely believe ourselves to be, or what we sincerely think ourselves to be. If we think we are bound, if we think we are miserable, so we must pray to God to solve the problems, then God will give you solution to these problems, but your understanding of God will be limited to that extent. But when we realize that we are the supreme truth, which is beyond all this, which is not subject to this cycle of life and death, then we get out of this wheel of existence, relative existence. That's what the Upanishad tells. In fact, the 15th mantra contains a prayer from a devotee to take him out of this wheel of life and death. So long as we continue doing actions, any kind of action, thinking, speaking, or doing things with our hands, whatever we do, if we do with any, even the least desire, we have to be born again, either to enjoy or suffer that desire, according to our mindsets with which we have done this work. We have to be born again and again. The moment we transcend this realm of this jurisdiction of desire and selfishness, then we are out of this cycle of life and death. So, in the 15th verse, as I explained earlier, Hiranmayena patrena satyasya mukham apihitam, the golden disc or golden lids. The devotee is addressing the sun god. As I explained earlier, from a pantheistic point of view, sun is the highest divine principle. In pantheism, we believe that the divine principle expresses itself in its completeness in the phenomenal world. Nature is equated with the Godhead. So this devotee who says this prayer in the 15th verse, as being leading a very virtuous life all through. Speaking the truth, worshipping God as the supreme, the Son as the supreme God. Now he is approaching the end of his life. He is about to die. And remember, in a way, the entire Upanishad philosophy is nothing but an attempt to explain the problem of death. All religious philosophies are related to the problem of death. The problem of death and problem of life are the same. How to face death intelligently. How to face the problem of the crisis of death with equanimity of mind. I already quoted sometime earlier in some other context. In the Bhagavata Purana, you find, I quoted earlier, a great king, Parikshit, he puts this question to a sage, the greatest sage of that time, Shuka. What should be the thought of a dying man? He asked this question in the first skandha. And answer to this, in the second book of that text, the great sage Shuka answers, Etavan Sankhya Yoga Abhyam Sudharma Parinishthaya Janma Labha Parapumsam Ante Narayana Smriti. In simple English, it means this. The ultimate goal of a man is to die with God's name in his lips and God's thoughts in his heart. Memory of God, of the Supreme Truth, in mind, that is the sign of a well-lived life. So that should be the ultimate goal. That should be the ultimate goal of a man whom death is staring at his face. Here, this devotee who has led a very virtuous life, who has been worshipping sun god all his life, he says, Satyadharmaya. He is referring to himself. Satyadharmaya means Mahyam. For myself. To me, who has led a virtuous life, whose life was dedicated to Satyam, the Supreme Truth, and who has followed the path of virtues, righteousness, Dharma. To me, you kindly open the golden lid of name and form with which you have covered your own face. He alone can remove this cover, this golden lid. God alone can show you his true dimension by removing his name and form. So there is a famous sloka, see, Ishvara Anugraha Deva Pumsam Advaita Vasana. The meaning is this: by God's grace alone can one attain even a sincere desire to listen to these ideas. That's what this sloka implies. So God's grace is necessary, which God alone can remove this golden lid with which he has covered his face. You cannot grab it away, because his own grace is necessary. That is Ishvara Anugraha Deva, the Sanskrit verse tells us. Then he says, Tattvam Pushan Apavrunu Satyadharmaya Drishtaya. Tattva means the supreme truth, the supreme nature, the supreme reality. Apavrunu, you please remove, so that I can see your true nature, I can realize your true nature. Because this creation, this world itself is the golden lid. God has covered his own true nature with this golden lid in the form of this visible universe. And this visible universe is his own creation. Why should he put this mask? Why can't he reveal his true nature? The point is, why should there be creation? You can never find a purpose for creation. Why should God create this world? Now, if God is in need of something, then He certainly not very, but His condition is not very, not much better than our condition. We are in need of many things. So God also is in need of something. He is in need of creating this world. And God doesn't have any need to fulfill. If He has a need to fulfill, God cannot be God. He will become imperfect. And what is imperfect cannot be God. So, this creation is explained in Vedantic language as a play, as a sport. There is a famous sutra is there, Brahmastra, Lokavat Leela Kaivalyam. The idea is, Advaitins explain this creation as a play. No, when you play, you don't have a purpose. If a sportsman may be working 6 hours, 7 hours, practicing every day, for him it is not Leela. Leela means play. For him he is working hard. For playing he may be reading a book. But a bookworm, a person who spends most of his time reading books, may play volleyball for half an hour. For him, volleyball play is play. But a professional volleyball player may be working 6-7 hours a day, toiling. For him it is not play. It is hard work. Then only he can remain in his team. So there cannot be any motive for play or sport. It is a kind of hobby. So it is God's hobby. Creation is nothing but God's hobby. That is what Advaitins say. There is no other way you can explain this creation. Why should creation be in this way? You can say an object falls from the air because of the gravitational pull of the earth. Somebody asks, why should there be gravitational pull? There is no answer. You can explain all this. The how you can explain, not the why of creation. Because there can be no why for play. If somebody is playing, why should you play? That means he doesn't have a motive. He doesn't plan for a long time and then play. Then there is no play for him. It is only work. So, the entire creation is explained in Advaitic philosophy as the divine play. So for that he has covered his own face with a golden lid in the form of name and form. Please kindly remove this golden lid of yours so that I can have a vision of your true nature. That's a prayer of the devotee. In the 15th verse, we'll continue that next class. Thank you. Those of you who have got any questions and those who have got any doubts, any need for clarification of any ideas, you can write them out and hand over to some of the office bearers here. Whom should they give?
They can leave them here at the back.
You can leave at the back. Yes, that's right. That's better. When you were asking, some